Hello and welcome to episode 70 of The Garden Log. I'm Ben Dark and I am a gardener, and this is a gardening podcast. This week I am talking about planting up a winter woodland bank. I'm talking about cutting back the herbaceous peonies, and I'm talking about top-dressing fine lawns with pure green waste compost, something I haven't done before. I'm recording this episode on Monday the 4th of November, after coming back from a long weekend in the countryside. It's the best week to get away, the first week of November. You always get the autumn leaves then. Even I associate October with leaf change, but it's not. It starts now. Here's where it really begins. Here's when the big guns come into play, when the beech and the lime start throwing out the orange and the yellows. I went to Mottisfont Abbey, which I haven't been to before. Saw some really nice things down there. They've got a walled rose garden, and in there I really enjoyed seeing the fantastic stands of flaring autumn Agapanthus. It's something I always forget. I always remember the beautiful blue flowers, and I remember the frost-covered seed heads from so many gardening magazines and from gardens that I've worked in as well. But I always forget the weeks of glory, these brilliant banana yellow leaves and stems that rise up from amongst the greying plants that stand around them. I took some nice pictures of that, which I'll put on the Facebook group. I also really enjoyed walking into one of the areas of walled gardening where they had beautifully clipped lavender hedges. They were using Hidcut, and they'd clipped it into the most perfect domed hedges, and the paths between them were grey slate. And this silver domes with the grey soil between them created quite a pleasantly disconcerting effect. It wasn't like the rest of the garden. Where were my greens? Where was my mud? I also went to Wisley. I've just come back from Wisley. I was there today. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that I saw there later. But it's always nice to get to Wisley on a working day, because you can see the gardeners. You can see them going about their business, all the various tasks that those brave RHS boys and girls get up to. So that was very pleasant indeed. It's been a very good week, and we shouldn't waste any more time on this introduction. Let's get on and listen to the week in gardening. Welcome to the week in gardening. And by the week in gardening, I of course mean my week in gardening. It's really what I should have titled this feature 70 episodes ago. The Week in Gardening sounds as if this is really the pinnacle, the definitive article, and that every other little week in gardening that people might have had out there, well, really they are just pale imitations of me splitting a hosta on Thursday afternoon. Anyway, we can't get around that now. This is The Week in Gardening. It is also my week in gardening, and this week it began on Monday with a grand planting out. I'm planting out an area that had been hitherto slightly nondescript, filled with strange things that had almost drifted onto those shores after a time, like one of those coves that you occasionally see on a holiday down in Cornwall, or on the Pembrokeshire coast, or maybe down in Dorset even. A little cove that should be beautiful, but has somehow attracted the windbreak that blew from the adjacent cove, and then a large bit of a boat that drifted in from sea, and some fluff and some foam and a bit of tarpaulin. And all of this stuff is there, just existing, looking generally quite grotty. And we have the equivalent, the terrestrial equivalent. There are some hardy fuchsias that have grown very big and been pruned very poorly. They're very close to a path, so they get pruned back often, every time someone gets annoyed with them getting in their face and tugging at their sleeves, insisting that we notice them, and then they chop them back with shears or a hedge trimmer, which means they never get a chance to flower on their front side because the fuchsias flower on new wood, newly produced. They just flower at the sides. So you get a sort of red sideburn effect in this plant, a bit like a clown with tufts of red hair at the side of its head and then a big blank face. And then there are sedums, or the old sedum, the new Hylotelephium. And these are sedums that have been planted there because it's so easy to get more sedums. Sedums split so easily, they seed everywhere. You can whack one with a stout ash pole and knock all the leaves off and then stick those leaves in the soil, and then you've got new sedums. They're like the spartoi springing up from dragon's teeth wherever you throw them. Anyway, there's lots of sedums in various coves in the garden, and these are in a position where they're not getting nearly enough light, so they have grown long and etiolated, searching for those nourishing rays. And that means that the plant isn't supporting itself, so we have a dead centre, a bald spot, where the plant is pulling away from itself. And it's not attractive, it's not a nice area. So these have been taken out, and I'm replacing them with more appropriate plants. And given the fate of that sedum, we can tell that the appropriate plants must be a bit more shade-loving. I'm going for hellebores. I'm going for hellebores, the little basic, most obvious of the hellebores, Hellebore cross-hybridus, the oriental hellebore. And that's because I want them to seed about and play with each other a bit, but also because it's a heavy clay soil. And some hellebores are a bit more fussy about that than others, but I think that the cross-hybridus goes fine on clay. In fact, it quite likes clay. I can tell that because there's a clump of hellebores further up the bank in the same conditions that almost stop people in their tracks, which is rare for such a thing as a hellebore. So I think these are going to add to that effect. And then above those, I'm going for pretty large Hamamelis Aphrodite, which is one of those brilliant orange-tinged yellow-flowered Hamamelis. I can see the buds there on the bare branches now, looking fat and promising. So I'm very excited about getting those wonderful tinsel spiders appearing on the branches with all their brilliant smell. I think I've put in about 5 or 6 separate cultivars of the hybrid hellebores, because I'm hoping that we'll get some incredibly exciting new cultivar appearing in a couple of years that I can breed on and name and leave something of a legacy, which I think is a fantasy of many gardeners. I have a couple of things always lying around in greenhouses or pots in various places that I've seen little seedlings that I've pricked out and thought, that looks like it's doing something interesting. I'll grow that on. So I've got, at the moment, I've got a little yew seedling that popped up in a gravel bed, and it's got some silver variegation on the foliage, and it seems to be branching a lot earlier than I'd expect for a yew seedling of this height. So I don't know if it's going to be slightly dwarfed. We don't have any silver variegated yews in the garden, so where it's appeared from, I don't know whether it's a natural variation or it's coming from one of the golden Irish yews crossed with something else. Anyway, I don't know. I'll keep my eyes upon it and see if it does anything interesting, and then I can propagate cuttings from it and grow them on and observe them and then launch it into the nursery trade to great fanfare. And it will be the most fantastic and grandest of all the ironies, because I absolutely hate variegated yews. I really dislike them. There's never one I've seen that I've enjoyed whatsoever. And most variegated plants I'm slowly coming round to. So that would be a good way to bow out of horticulture, with a little bit of self-wounding, a bit of personal nose slicing, Anyway, we'll see what happens there. Hellebores are wonderfully, wonderfully prolific little cedars. And you pick them out and you say, well, in 2 or 3 years when this finally flowers, we'll see what turns up. And I've picked a different range. I think I've picked 5 cultivars of different colours. And it's a useless plan. It really is a useless plan. I don't know why I am doing it and why I expect anything fun or exciting to come from it. Because it's essentially just random mixing. It's like trying to create a new and beautiful paint colour, the most beautiful paint colour that no one's ever seen, that is going to take the world of interior decorating and exterior decorating by storm, trying to create this paint by throwing together all of your favourite pigments at random in a bucket and shaking it. And we know what happens in that paint bucket. Of course we know. It turns brown. All of those beautiful viridians and ochres blend together and make brown. And this is what my hellebores will almost certainly do. They're going to come out insipid and dull and a sort of dark mauve colour. And I'll have to name my new cultivar Hellebores cross hybridus muddy puddle, or Hellebores cross hybridus faded sock. It's the hope, though, isn't it? It's the knowledge that there might be jewels amongst the dirt. We might find something. On Tuesday, I did some top dressing of some of the lawns. New top dressing, a new direction in top dressing for me. In previous years, you probably heard about it on the garden log, if you're interested in that kind of thing. In the past, I have certainly talked on here about top dressing with a specialised top dressing mix that is essentially a large part kiln dried sand, very, very fine, very, very dry sand that flows through your fingers and should get down into bits of the soil and crevices and cracks and the holes that we make hollow tining and spiking and slitting. And I hope that some of you thought about doing that to your lawn after hearing me talk about it. I also hope that none of you actually did, because I've had a bit of a change of heart. I was thinking about this and I was seeing the results from this. It's one of the things that I just assumed was doing good. But looking at some of the cords through the lawn, looking at how the lawn behaved after the applications of this top dressing in previous years, I don't think it was doing any good whatsoever. In fact, I think it was causing problems. I think that the very, very fine particles, all they did was created a silt. So I'd make these wonderful holes and then fill them up with a very, very thick silty layer. And I was also creating a layer of silt on top of the soil of the lawn, which has a much more normal, loamy profile, and they weren't really blending. So I was creating this strange little rooting zone for the grass, which really wasn't doing much good. I think that I probably fell prey to that classic fallacy that the most expensive is best. The most expensive top dressing stuff you can get is this kiln dried sand. But I've worked it out. I think that is for golf. That is for the managers of golf courses, for those fairways that are essentially built of sand and kept green all year through heavy applications of fertiliser. It's a completely different substance. Of course, if your lawn is built of sand, then adding more sand to it might do good. But I don't think it was really doing anything to our lawns. So I've decided to go for an entirely new approach in this garden and top dress with a very, very well rotted compost that we've bought in, that has been incredibly well filtered, not well filtered enough as it turns out, and hope that makes more of a difference, that brings more organic matter into the soil, that gets down into the cracks and then is pulled away in different directions by the worms and holds onto more water and is generally incorporated better than this silty cement, this dried Weetabix substance that I was creating in the ground. So we put down 6 or so tons of that and heaved it about with rakes and and, well, mainly rakes. I keep meaning to buy a lute, but haven't got around to it. A lute is the specialist top-dressing, putting-in tool, rather than the medieval troubadour's instrument. So anyway, we spent the day working this wonderful black stuff. So anyway, we spent the day working it in with the rakes until only the large bits of twig that hadn't been filtered remained on the top of the soil. And I'm hoping that after the first couple of passes with the lawnmower, all of those will get sucked off. It looked quite disconcertingly black, the lawn afterwards, but we've now had a few days of rain in between, and the black powder coating to the grass has washed off, just leaving the soil beneath looking slightly darker, but hopefully healthier and more nourished and more able to sustain itself in the future and years to come. Goodness knows, it's all a process of experimentation. You realise sometimes you think that you can be doing the best thing possible, but actually you've been causing great harm. Who knows, this might be causing great harm. In 2 years' time I might be cursing myself for the compost wounds I have inflicted upon this poor lawn, but for now I think I have made the right decision, and I will certainly try to keep you updated on any differences I notice with the composted and non-composted lawns. We're doing a very, very small trial, essentially. Some areas are getting this compost treatment, some areas are getting nothing at all. We're going to see if it makes a difference, or if it's just one of those jobs that turns up on a list of things to do in the autumn because people need something to do in the autumn. On Wednesday, I continued to plant the bank, the hellebore and hamamelis bank. And I was thinking how strange it was. It hadn't struck me until then that one of my first jobs in big private estate gardening, when I was many rungs down from making the decision about what would be planted in the garden, was to plant up a bank with hamamelis and with hellebore cross hybridus, an almost identical planting. And I don't know if this stuck in my head or if it's just an example of convergent evolution. We have a bank, we have shade, we want some winter interest. Well, it's hellebore and it's hamamelis. I mean, that would be the sensible, the rational thing. But maybe I don't. Maybe I have a proto-bank garden stuck in my head somewhere. Maybe I have several proto-gardens. Maybe I have a proto-vision of a Japanese garden, of a rock garden, of a water garden, and I'm never going to escape it. It's like childhood trauma. It might influence the rest of a sufferer's life without them even knowing about it. Maybe we all have these carried around deep within our psyche. Something to consider. Think about whether you have replicated plantings, consciously or unconsciously, from years previous. Anyway, the area is not going to just be hellebore and hamamelis. I'm also going to bombard the place with snowdrops. Nothing better than hellebore with its leaves cut right back, and those beautiful flowers in pinks and spotted yellows, and a sea adrift of Agapanthus all around them. I actually saw some snowdrops out today. It is November, and the autumn flowering snowdrops, the Queen Olga's snowdrop, has started to come out, and it's such a strange thing to see it. I'm quite glad that we don't have more of it in the garden. We don't have any of it in the garden, actually. I saw it at Wisley. But we don't have any of it in the garden because it almost throws me, because snowdrop is such an evocative, such a welcome herald of spring. I realise that I react to it on an emotional level more than an aesthetic level. And these little Queen Olga's snowdrops, they look very similar to the classic Agapanthus nivalis. These are Agapanthus reginae Olgiae, which does mean Queen Olga, obviously, and they look very, very similar to the nivalis. But they flower in a garden that has so much more going on, that has autumn flowers still out, that has blazes of red and acer everywhere, that still has roses in sheltered corners, and somehow you lose them more. They don't provoke the same heart-squeezing joy. They're just a pretty white flower amongst many other things, and you hurry past them to look at the grasses and see if any euonymus is doing anything. Anyway, that's a long diversion. What I meant to say was that this bank will be planted with proper winter flowering snowdrops that can cheer the heart of those just emerged from hibernation garden visitors, those brave souls who seek the harbingers of spring. On Thursday, I did some more planting, some more leaf clearing, and a little bit of herbaceous tidying work, taking out the peony leaves, the herbaceous peony leaves particularly. The intersectional hybrid peonies, the Bartzella cultivars that I planted because they die in a less horrendous manner, are still looking fairly good. They have a little bit of red tinted in the leaves. They stand upright as a bunch. The leaves tend to drop off in one go rather than collapsing around the plant like a head of mouldy lettuce. But I wouldn't plant them for their autumn display, but they're neater, they're nicer. If you are the kind of gardener who doesn't enjoy getting out and cutting back a plant as soon as it starts looking raggedy, then don't grow purely herbaceous peonies. Grow intersectional hybrid peonies. And don't grow hostas either. It's a satisfying job. I enjoy it. You get to see the buds of next year poking out between as well, which is quite exciting. That promise of things to come. Interestingly, I'm working on a slight time delay. I'm talking about here Thursday, the last day of October. I'm recording this on Monday, the 4th of November. And today I've been down at Wisley, down in Surrey, the RHS flagship garden. And at the moment they have peonies, herbaceous peonies, growing in the trial beds. Wisley, I don't know if any of you haven't been, each year they choose a certain species or a group of species, closely related species, and grow lots of cultivars for a season or two, and they'll have a committee attached to that particular group in a long bed who go along and mark them and say, well, this one was very pretty, but it only flowered for 2 days, and well, this one was completely nondescript, but look at it. It's been nondescript perfectly well all year round, and they decide through those various criteria whether it gets a coveted RHS Award of Garden Merit. And at the moment they've got lots of peonies and they haven't cut any of them back, so there's this horrendous plague-ridden bed of horrible rotten peonies that looks like someone has taken a field of brassicas and upended the vegetable drawer on them and then blown them with a blowtorch and frozen and defrosted them. It really does look spectacularly bad growing them all together. It's quite nice to see though, quite nice to see what happens when you leave them up and standing. We wouldn't get away with that, so all of those peonies are now chopped back, the leaves consigned to the compost heap. And that was it. With the peonies tidied away, I took myself away from the garden, off for a long weekend to the countryside to look at colours, to get new ideas, to generally refresh and recharge and drink in some of that seasonal change energy. I remember studying my A-level chemistry, and all energy came from changes of state. And I think it's the same in gardening, isn't it? You get invigorated at any shift in the season and want to go out there and drink it in. Like Frankenstein harvesting lightning, I was out there harvesting autumn. Anyway, enough of that. Let's see if I have any recommendations for you this week. Less a recommendation and more of a request this week. It stems once more from my trip down to Wisley. I went to Wisley about probably 13 or 14 months ago last. And remember when I was there, one of the gardeners told me that they were trialling this new weeding technique called root wave that sent a pulse of electricity through unwanted plants and fried them at the root zone, leaving all green matter around them untouched. So the gardeners essentially had these wonderful plant tasers. I noticed they had signs saying they're still using it. They're still trialling it in the little South African prairie meadow they've created behind the greenhouse, which, by the way, was looking very good. I think they've done a very good job there. Absolutely stuffed full of nerines, and then the skeletons of eucomis and the yellowing Agapanthus that I talked about earlier in this episode. Really nice, exciting little bit of garden. There was a huge amount of Nymphophea, of red hot pokers, not in flower, but it looked like they'd flowered the stems. Must have looked quite spectacular earlier in the year. I'll have to get back. In midsummer and see what it looks like next year. Anyway, that's not what I was talking about. I was talking about zapping roots of weeds with doses of electricity. Then I got home from Wisley and found my latest copy of Horticulture Week had been delivered, the must-read magazine for horticulturalists in the trade. And there, they're talking about this fantastic tractor-mounted electrical zapper from the same company, using the same technology. You stick it on the front of your tractor if you're going between lines of soft fruit, and it rootles around underneath the flopping leaves of your raspberries or your currants or your strawberries, and little probes go down and zap anything unwanted, fry them in place, and it moves on. You drive 4 miles an hour of electrical death. Very exciting. And I was thinking, what we really, really need from electrical technology isn't this, and it's not necessarily a cattle prod for gardeners. What we really need is something to deal with broad-leaved weeds in fine lawn. And I know that a lot of people don't care about broad-leaved weeds in their lawn. If there's dandelion, if there's clover, whatever, absolutely fine. I don't care at home either. I have no problem, the more the merrier. But sometimes you are tasked with creating a very fine lawn. And at the moment, the best and most efficient way to do it is to use a selective herbicide, a herbicide that targets broadleaf plants and leaves the monocots, the grass species, where they are. And no one wants to be dosing the garden with anything. We don't want to go around with knapsack sprayers. I abhor it. I hate it. I occasionally have to do it, but you'll notice I've never mentioned it. It's not something that I'm particularly proud of. What I want is a little robot mower. A little robot lawnmower, one of those things that has its home pod and then goes out on trundling missions every day. And I don't want it for cutting the grass, because I quite like cutting the grass with heavy mowers that have rollers on the back, so you get stripes on the lawn. I like that effect. But a little trundling thing that has a camera on the front that has a little bit of machine learning on a small computer attached, so it can recognise a broadleaf weed. It'd be very, very simple to do. They look nothing like a grass blade, and has a couple of arms underneath. It would only need 3 arms maybe, or one nozzle attached to 3 little in and out hydraulic things, so it could draw a grid underneath it, and that could go around trundling across the lawn, recognizing something that wasn't a blade of grass, zapping it with electricity, and going back to home. And it would be fantastic. The lawn would be kept essentially broadleafed weed-free, and you wouldn't have to douse it with chemicals. You wouldn't have to wander across the lawn with a long, thin fork or a carving knife, digging out dandelions, putting the grass back together, trying to repair it so the damage couldn't be seen. It would be perfect. It would make life so much easier. So anyone who is working on electric technology or robot mowers or machine learning or anything like that, if they could sort of start work on one of those, I and many other gardeners who want to be as absolutely organic as possible, but only have a certain amount of hours in the day and have certain tasks that really are chemical dependent, we'd be so grateful. So there's one for the community. A small request. If you have any requests for me, I can be found at thegardenlogpodcast@gmail.com, or you can find me on Facebook. On Facebook, I am at the Garden Log Podcast. That's a group where you can ask questions and put pictures on there. There's a good picture of me this week. I found a picture of me aged about one or so doing some gardening, by which I mean eating the soil in a flower pot. As part of my horticultural genesis, I suppose. There's quite a lot of gardening podcasts I listen to that are obsessed with the genesis of a gardener. When did you first start gardening? And I honestly believe that I was a person who didn't really get excited by plants until I had a sort of work-related crisis as a young graduate in 2008, and realised that I needed a job that gave me a tan and let me go to the pub at 4 in the afternoon. But it turns out that there was something earlier. There was something deep within me, something latent that came out. Maybe some bacteria that I ingested in those early days were working away in the deeper recesses of my brain. Who knows? Thank you very, very much for listening. And I hope that you have a wonderful week, whether or not you make it into the garden. I think it's going to be quite wet and blowy, so you can stay inside and listen to the back catalogue. Start planning next year's gardens. Anyway, until then, cheerio.